What is virtual memory? Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. This is one of those things that I think confuses a lot of people, especially when they see settings in Windows that refer to virtual memory, or potentially even run into performance issues that they may hear are related or blamed on virtual memory. I want to be very clear. There's memory and there's disk space, and those are two completely different things. When I refer to memory, I'm referring to RAM, the actual volatile, what they call volatile memory in your system. RAM is the memory into which programs are loaded when they're running. RAM is the memory that basically loses everything in it when you turn your machine off. Disks, on the other hand, are non-volatile memory. By that I mean that what you put on a disk stays on a disk until you remove it from the disk. As you can imagine, RAM is fast because, like I said, that's where all your programs are actually running from when you run the program. Disks, on the other hand, they're nice, they're persistent, that's great, but they're slower. They take more time to actually return the information from them or to write the information to them. So when you're running your programs, RAM is what's considered I guess I'd call it a scarce resource. By that I mean the more software you run, the more RAM you're going to use. The more things you do with that software, the more RAM each piece of software itself is going to use. Now, if you have enough RAM installed in your system, that's great. You're basically doing the best you can. However, it's not really that uncommon, especially in older machines that have a limited amount of RAM capability, or even on newer machines where we're all trying to do a zillion things at once, for the software on the machine to actually try to use more RAM than is physically installed in that machine. There are two things the operating system could do. It could fail. It could say, nope, you can't do that, and software will start to throw out of memory errors when that kind of thing happens. But what operating systems like Windows do is, instead of saying, nope, we're out, they do something called virtual memory. What virtual memory is in essence, treating some space on your hard disk as if it were RAM. Now, the way this works is you're running along, your system is using memory, you've got enough, and all of a sudden you don't. You run another program, you're just at the edge, and now your system needs more memory to run that program than you actually have. The system will take a look at everything that's in RAM right now, and it will say, this stuff right here, it hasn't been used in a while. I'm going to write that out to disk, free up the actual RAM so that I can now load this program that the user has requested to be run. There's enough RAM now because we freed some up, and your program will run. However, that other program that had some of its stuff written to disk, when it comes along later and says, hey, I want to do something, now all of a sudden the operating system has to say, oh, hang on a second. The RAM you think is in memory, I wrote that to disk. So I'm going to have to go get it and read it back into RAM. But before I can do that, if everybody's still here all using RAM, I need to free some up. So I'm going to choose some memory that's being used by this other program because it hasn't used it for a while. And I'm going to write that out to disk instead, then read what you've requested back into memory so that you can continue to operate as if your data was in RAM the entire time. That, in a nutshell, is virtual memory. It's just swapping out information from RAM to disk to free up actual RAM as needed, and then reading that stuff back in from disk when it's needed once again. Again, potentially swapping something else out from RAM to disk in order to make room. Swapping is an interesting concept, and it's a key term you'll probably hear a lot. When your system is operating normally, you have enough RAM, there's nothing going on. The system may still read and write to and from virtual memory, but not very often. However, if you suddenly need virtual memory for a little while, then yeah, the system will start writing and reading to the disk. However, if that continues, if you are literally trying to do more than your RAM capacity allows for, then the system will start swapping to and from disk continually. That's typically what's referred to as thrashing. And the problem with thrashing, honestly, the problem with needing to swap at all, is the fact that, as I said earlier, disks are slower than RAM. Even solid-state disks that are actually implemented using solid-state circuitry, they're faster than hard disks. They're faster than the old metal hard disks, but they are still slower than the RAM that's built into your machine. So, what do? Well, there are a couple of different schools of thought on this. My school of thought is, well, maybe not do so much, especially if your system is maxed out on RAM to begin with. Remember, a system's motherboard actually defines how much RAM you can install ever. There is a maximum. Older machines typically have a lower maximum than newer machines. It's one of those continually moving targets. If your system is maxed out and you find yourself thrashing, there's really not a lot you can do other than making sure that you're doing as little as possible. You're putting as little stress on the system as possible. And that can mean removing startup entries. It can mean not having as many tabs open in your browser. It can mean not trying to do as many things at once. On the other hand, if your system has the capacity, then absolutely put in more RAM. If this is something that you encounter normally and frequently, adding RAM to your system is one of the best options you have to improve your system performance if you're faced with thrashing, if you're faced with excessive virtual memory use. But ultimately, that's really all virtual memory is. It's the system doing this crazy tap dance to make sure that your system will work as best it can, even if it doesn't have enough RAM to do it all, simply by making hard disk look like RAM and copying things back and forth as quickly as it can. For comments, for updates, for links related to this topic and more, visit askleo.com/1925. I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.